Welcome, everybody. I'm John Damilakis, and I have the pleasure to introduce Dr. Chris Trauernicht. Many of you know Chris. Chris is the head of the Medical Physics Division at Tygerberg Hospital in Cape Town, South Africa, and an associate professor at Stellenbosch University. He's the current president of the Federation of African Medical Physics Organizations, FAMPO, and currently serves on the IOMP Accreditation Board. Chris serves as an assessor for the Health Professions Council of South Africa and has acted as examiner and convenor for the Colleges of Medicine of South Africa. The agency, the IAEA, International Atomic Energy Agency, has appointed Chris as an expert on numerous occasions, new missions, including the implementation of the Basic Safety Series for medical professionals, the prevention of accidents and incidents in radiotherapy, and recently on a regional training course to train the trainers in radiation safety culture. Hence the idea for this talk. The title of the talk is catchy, safety blinded or safety minded, don't learn safety by accident. So it's about radiation safety culture. One more thing about Chris. Chris was the recipient of the 2020 International Day of Medical Physics Award for his services to medical physics in the FAMPO region. So for the next 40-45 minutes, Chris will present this very interesting topic. And please, if you have any questions, use the chat option of Zoom platform, and hopefully we'll have 10 minutes at the end for discussion. Chris, the stage is yours.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction, John. It's a privilege and an honor to be here. I am, well, for those who haven't met me, I'm the tall guy. And if you do meet me, that's probably what you'll remember. So I'm the head of medical physics at Tygerberg Hospital. Let's just get the slides going. There we go. Tygerberg Hospital is a very large hospital. It's a tertiary hospital that was opened in Cape Town in 1976, almost 1,400 beds. So the big brown block in the middle, that's the main hospital. The white blocks in front, that's the medical school, and this building at the back, I don't know if you can see my pointer. Can you see the pointer? Well, it doesn't really matter. That's the radiotherapy building. We have 5 bunkers, 4 of them have Linux, 1 is currently being replaced. The hospital has over 100,000 admissions annually, over 30,000 operations, 67 wards, 29 theaters, around 4,500 staff, and 400 roughly of those are radiation workers. So how did I get to speak about this topic? In 2015, I attended an IAEA training course on medical physics aspects of a quattro audit. This was TRS 398 and particularly end-to-end testing. It focused specifically on the physics aspects of a quattro audit. I moved to Tygerberg Hospital in 2017. And at the time, there were thoughts of doing a quattro audit at the hospital. So I attended a training course on comprehensive audits of radiotherapy in Kenya. This was then followed by a training course on prevention of accidents and incidents. That was together with the head RTT. And the idea was then that we use that information and pass it on. We had our full quattro audit in November 2018, and in 2019, we then had a national training course specifically for Tygerberg Hospital on the prevention of accidents and incidents in radiotherapy. It was a very interesting course. One of the trainers ended up being in a hospital in Germany and couldn't make it, but it was quite a valuable course anyway. So I now had all this training, and I then moved from being taught to teaching it. So at the African Radiation Protection Conference, I was asked to give a refresher course on this topic, where I presented a lot of the tools that are available for the prevention of accidents and incidents in radiotherapy. I was asked to be a panelist on a technical meeting, particularly on the use of incident learning systems. I was then asked to talk about safety culture and occupational radiation protection at that conference in Geneva. And then most recently, I was appointed as an IAEA expert to train the trainers in radiation safety culture. Shortly after this meeting, I got the email and I kind of figured, what should I talk about? This seemed like a good idea. So why this topic? Well, I had a former head of oncology who spoke to me one day and said, physicists are all somewhere on the spectrum anyway, meaning we all have a mild case of Asperger's or similar. What did she mean? Highly intelligent, very good at problem solving, not so good at the soft skills, but not so good at communicating, a little rough around the edges. Physicists are often the socially awkward crowd. And so what I'm talking to today is mostly about the softer skills to improve radiation safety culture. I've also found that it's quite often overlooked. It's not taught in the medical physics academic training, not particularly. It's often not taken particularly seriously. I've come across cases where you hear, well, if we get the new LINAC, then we will do better. And I'm here to say that you can do better right now. Safety culture is more than radiation safety culture. I'm going to use the terms interchangeably. But by applying the traits I'm going to talk about today, you can improve the culture where you are without necessarily having the fanciest of equipment. So I came across a paper in the Journal of Patient Safety that said that medical errors leading to patient death may be as high as 400,000 deaths a year. Now, if you imagine if a Boeing goes down with 400 or so people on board, it'll make the news headlines for days on end. This is me at the Soccer World Cup in Cape Town. Cape Town Stadium holds 66,000 or so people. 400,000 is 6 full soccer stadiums that die every year because, maybe as high as that much, because of medical errors. And hopefully by applying safety culture traits, we can help do something about this. So the IAEA published a book on radiation safety culture traits in roughly 2021. It kind of got a little drowned out by all the COVID noise, but in it they describe a number of radiation safety traits that can be applied to improve safety culture. I had the privilege of presenting this course with the two lovely ladies on the picture, Barbara and Debbie. They did agree that I can show their picture. Both of them were quite involved in actually writing the book. And the book is designed in such a way that each of the traits is presented as a short oral presentation, followed by a case study of something that went wrong to determine how one of the traits works, and afterwards a facilitated discussion to discuss what could have improved. This discussion can be done in terms of people breaking up into small groups of the same profession, different professions, can include role-playing, can include a split of people, to discuss the particular case study. Of course, today I can't do this, so I'm just going to talk about the traits a little bit. You will see I have a fair amount of text on the slides. I did this on purpose so that whoever wants the slideshow, I'm happy to share it. I have seen many slideshows with lots of pictures, and afterwards when I looked at it, I couldn't remember what was said. And then each of the traits is followed by a short video clip. So what's safety culture? Let's delve into the topic. Safety culture is the assembly of characteristics and attitudes in the organizations, its managers and workers, which assures that as an overriding priority, safety issues receive the attention warranted by their significance. That's the definition according to the International Atomic Energy Agency. The characteristics of a safety culture include that safety is a clearly recognized value, that the leadership and the leadership structures for safety are clear, that the accountability is clear, that safety is integrated into all activities, and that safety is learning driven. It's not a static field, it's not a once-off thing, but that it is learning driven. In fact, Many of you would have heard about the Bond Call for Action from 2012, where 10 actions to improve radiation protection in medicine were proposed, and the 8th trait was strengthening radiation safety culture in healthcare, with the underlying thought that incorporating safety culture into the healthcare setting can help prevent injuries, adverse events. And so in this booklet, they particularly propose that we learn from other industries that have quite an advanced safety culture, like the nuclear power industry or the aviation industry. And interestingly, one of the things they mention is that we should all work towards the recognition of medical physics as an independent healthcare profession with radiation protection responsibilities. I know in Africa, particularly, this is a big topic. Most countries in Africa do not have this, and I know many internationally also don't have it. So very briefly, what's a trait? For those where English isn't the first language, it's a pattern of thinking or feeling and behaving. And if we look at safety culture, it's doing this in terms of safety. So we want to prioritize safety. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to briefly go through the 10 different traits, or through 10 of the traits that improve safety culture. Some I will delve into a little deeper because they're more important to me in my setting. You will find that the traits are interrelated, and some may speak to you more than others. Anyway, let's go. So the first trait is individual responsibility. This is absolutely crucial for anything to work properly. All individuals take personal responsibility for what they do, including safety. So this means that everybody, leaders and employees, are responsible for their performance, for the roles they play in radiation protection, for the roles they play in the system, and for upholding standards, high standards preferably. So these standards could be either put down by the regulator, could be put down by organizations like ESTRO or the AAPM, that give you a certain baseline from which to work. And the idea is that everybody takes ownership of their actions and decisions. If you're a leader and you have staff under you, you can develop personal accountability by empowering the employees, and this can be done by allowing the employees to undergo training and to obtain the skills that allow them to do the job well. And once that's done, you can set performance objectives and apply some management tools to set and evaluate these. Positive reinforcement is a good thing. It can come from anybody. It doesn't necessarily have to come from the supervisor. But one of the things that comes out of accountability is potentially mindfulness, that you start thinking of how do my actions affect the bigger picture, how do my actions affect the patients at the end of the line. I found when working as a clinical medical physicist, it's very easy to lose track of, or to lose sight of, there's a patient at the end of the line who needs to get a diagnosis or treatment. Accountability also improves attention to detail. So I remember when I was done with my internship or residency, depending on what it's called in your country, and I had to sign off my first patient treatment chart where I was solely responsible. I can guarantee you I double and triple checked that thing because I suddenly was very unsure, is this the right thing or not? And also accountability can motivate self-assessment, where you actually check yourself, am I doing the right thing? Now, most of us don't work as an individuals, but we work in a team. And in a team, we also have individual responsibilities that include good communication, and it includes activity coordination. The former head of oncology at a different hospital, in one of his mission statement, he had the statement, we work in the spirit of cross-checking. And it wasn't a case of, I want to check up on you to fail you, but it was a case of, let's cross-check each other for the best outcome of the patient. If you're a leader, this may include actively coaching new or junior staff members and giving them the tools or publications to obtain the theoretical knowledge. This should enable them to take job ownership where each individual understands their responsibility in the professional environment. This includes ensuring that they are trained and qualified, and this is not necessarily only the leader that has to offer this, but it goes both ways, and also knowing when they don't know. So I've often found that a good medical physicist is the one who knows when he or she doesn't know and can do something about it. And then they can take ownership for the preparation and execution of assigned tasks, work responsibilities. So this is where it gets a little interesting. If you look at Jens Rasmussen's model of human performance, he defined 3 categories, where he started off with skill-based performance. So this is something that can be learned and can be improved through repetition, like, for example, monthly LINAC QC. Then he had rule-based performance. This is something that doesn't happen quite as often. It's often slightly more complex, like adjusting lasers on a linear accelerator. You may have to consult a manual or similar. And then he had knowledge-based human performance. For example, commissioning a new treatment technique, an unfamiliar task that you're faced with, and how do you deal with this? So usually any task happens on more than one level. But if we look at job ownership, how this applies to job ownership, then it doesn't necessarily make sense to take a fresh resident and expect knowledge-based competencies, because they're just not there yet. And so as a leader, it's our responsibilities to train the staff, to give them the confidence to do their job well. Right. The second trait is a questioning attitude. The idea behind this is that individuals avoid complacency, continuously challenge existing conditions and activities to identify discrepancies that might result in error or inappropriate action. So we want to look out for assumptions, for anomalies, for conditions or activities that can have an undesirable effect on either facility or patients or staff safety. So this is often a trait that's quite difficult to implement, especially in very hierarchical structures. If you have a clinician who thinks he's God, the questioning attitude is not necessarily what they want, but it is a good thing to work on that. Why is this trait important? Well, complacency can be a key contributor to incidents. There have been cases like this. And if you have a questioning attitude, that can help to avoid complacency. For example, if a planning radiographer or a dosimetrist asks the doctor, are you sure this prescription is correct? Because it's not what we usually see. That's not an unreasonable question. It's a diligent person who's picking up that something is different and it may be incorrect. It may be a junior person who actually just says, you know, this procedure is not clear to me. Can you please explain it again? This is what's meant by a questioning attitude. So questions one can ask are something like, am I doing the right thing? How can I do it better? How can it be done differently? What new practices could we implement? Are we using the right assumptions? This is quite a big one. If you assume and your assumption is incorrect, then your assume can very quickly make an ass of you and me. And so it's very careful that you look at your assumptions and check whether they are correct. Okay, the third trait I'm going to look at is effective safety communication. So communication is defined as the process of understanding and sharing meaning, and we want to have communication that particularly focuses on safety. This can include communication at a facility level, communication related to the job or at the worker level. It can include basic things like equipment labeling, documentation, or similar. And effective communication also means that the flow of information up and down your organogram is equally important. So effective communication is at the heart of quicker problem solving, at the heart of higher productivity, more consistency in the workflow, better relationships between staff members, better control, and a better response from all stakeholders. Now, it turns out communication is quite a fickle creature. Only 7% of communication is actually verbal. 38% is tone and inflection, and over half of communication is body language. So this is one of the reasons if someone goes for a job interview, I always recommend to show up in person, or at the very least have a video call, because if you only have a telephone call, over half of your communication is missing. There are 8 essential components of communication that I'm briefly going to delve into. The first one is the source. So this is the one who imagines, creates, and sends the message. And this includes tone of voice, this includes how it's said, this includes the correct order of words, the correct words, body language, and all of that. The second part of communication, the second component, is the message. This is what the sender wants to say. And many things affect the message. So for example, if someone sends an email in all caps, usually that is accepted as meaning they're shouting at me. If someone uses a lot of punctuation, very impatient person probably. And so things like spelling and grammar and tone and body language all come into play here. So I wrote the sentence here, I never said she stole my wallet. Depending on where you place the emphasis in the sentence, you change the meaning of the sentence completely. So for example, if I say, I never said she stole my wallet, it means that I never said it. If I say, I never said she stole my wallet, it may mean that, well, she just borrowed it. And so you're welcome to do this exercise on your own. Place the emphasis on a different word each time and see how the meaning changes, how the message is affected. The third channel, or the third component of communication, is the channel. So this is the way in which the message travels between the source and the receiver. Face-to-face conversations, a webinar like this one, voicemail messages, a WhatsApp message, emails, all those are the channel of how communication happens. And then only do we get to the receiver. So this is the person who receives the message, who analyzes it, who interprets the message, and hopefully in ways that are intended by the receiver, but quite often also unintended. So imagine on the soccer pitch, a soccer pass will be made to the striker, and it may or may not arrive because the striker ran too fast and is now offside or something like that. The fifth essential component is feedback. So when you respond to a message, intentionally or unintentionally, you're giving feedback. And this allows the sender to see how accurately the message was received. This is one of the reasons why I don't particularly, during COVID times, I didn't like online teaching, because I couldn't see the response of the students. This is also the time where it's useful to ask for clarifications, for agreement or disagreement. And as this feedback increases, the accuracy of the communication also increases. Then you have the environment. So this is the physical or psychological surroundings. For example, if there's a jackhammer going off next door, I will probably have a serious headache at the end of the day and have missed half of what was said to me. Another example, people are more likely to have a closer, intimate conversation when they sit close to each other rather than shouting across the room. The seventh component is the context. So this involves what people expect from each other, and this can include culture as well. If I look at my division, I have probably 6, 7, 8 different cultures that come together from different tribes in South Africa and different backgrounds, and it can make for quite an interesting day sometimes. An example here, a business conversation may require a suit rather than swimming trunks. Or at a wedding, there'll be a formal component, but there'll also be dancing and celebration. So that's the context. And the last component is interference. So this is anything that blocks or changes the intended meaning of the message. Can be physical noise, can be low bandwidth, can be thoughts that occupy your attention. I wrote hangry. I get that sometimes when I'm very hungry and I don't have patience, I get hangry. Can be a case of just having no aircon and you feel hot and bothered and therefore aren't paying attention. Now, the thing with communication is Breakdowns can occur in any of these 8 components. So therefore, ensure that communication is timely, frequent, accurate, that the correct and the necessary information is passed on to do the work and activities safely, that the safety messages are integrated into the daily activities. You would like to avoid unintended or conflicting messages. You want to encourage questions. If something happens that people don't like a workflow change or resource allocations that go to a different department, communicate reasons and also communicate expectations. You want to discourage unnecessary interruptions and distractions, particularly during critical processes. You want to use standardized structure and terminology. So an SSD in radiotherapy is a source to skin distance, and in IT it's a solid state drive. Make sure the message is received and understood. And I should probably add in here, liaise with the regulator, have open communication lines with the regulator. If you don't, they might come back and give you a black eye, but not this one, a different one. Okay, the 4th trait is leadership. So leadership should demonstrate a commitment to safety in the decisions and behaviors. And as leaders, we have significant power to affect safety culture by setting priorities, by setting strategies and directions, by aligning people and resources to motivate and inspire workers. So leaders at all levels play an important role in establishing the organization's values, environment, and safety culture. What can this look like? So you want resources. As far as resources go, as a leader, you want to ensure that facilities are maintained. This includes equipment, that tools and equipment is available, that staffing levels are adequate. It may be useful to have a presence in the field where the leader can reinforce standards and expectations and model the behavior he or she wants to see. When you have incentives, sanctions, or rewards, make sure they're aligned with the safety policies. This includes the implementation of a just culture. Ensure that if you have change coming on, that your change management is systematic and that it's communicated well. And ensure that the roles and responsibilities, as well as the authority that's assigned to people, is well defined, understood, and documented. And this will also help you to delegate responsibility and authority and promote ownership of certain problems. Okay, the 5th trait is decision-making. We want decisions that support or affect safety to be systematic, rigorous, and thorough. What this means is that if operators are faced with an unexpected or uncertain conditions, they have the authority to choose safety. So we want to prioritize quality over deadlines as far as possible, and we want to support and reinforce conservative decisions as far as radiation safety is concerned. So staff definitely should have the authority to make decisions within their sphere of expertise, and these decisions should be systematic, rigorous, and thorough. What do I need to take such decisions? Well, to start off with, you may need the necessary tools that allow you to do this well. For example, appropriate validated software. It may require adequate expertise. It may require time. If there's an uncertainty somewhere and you have to do measurements and analyze those measurements and table them for a discussion, it may not be an instantaneous thing, but take some time. In some cases, it may even require external expertise. So in South Africa right now, we have tremendous issue with our electricity and our nuclear reactors currently down. We have lots of French engineers being flown in to address this issue. The expectation for decision-making should be clearly communicated by the leadership, and particularly in the medical field, in medical imaging, for example, one could look at the justification of a certain procedure, the optimization of the dose, and the limitation of dose as guiding the ALARA principle, as guiding your decision-making. If you Google this, the Google tips tell you you shouldn't let stress get the better of you. You should give yourself time if possible, weigh up the pros and cons, think about your goals, your values, consider different possibilities, talk it out with someone else, maybe keep a diary that helps you in some cases, plan how you will tell others, rethink your options, learn from your mistakes, learn from experience, argue it out, know the context in which you're operating. Maybe it helps assume that a decision is wrong and what would happen if, and get input from others. In my case, I have quite often found when I have to take decisions that I struggle quite a bit to figure out which decision is better, but I struggle a lot less to figure out which decision is worse. And approaching it from that angle often helps me to make a decision. Now, with decisions, it's also very interesting because these can be influenced in a massive way, and the things that influence decisions are called bias. And there are dozens and dozens of different biases. I'm mentioning a couple here. For example, looking only for information that confirms my beliefs, the confirmatory bias seems to be very prevalent in American politics, for example. Probably shouldn't say that. Jumping to conclusions early on without having all information is a certain type of bias. Overconfidence is a different type of bias. Joining a group opinion just because, the bandwagon bias. It can be quite difficult to be the one person with a different opinion. And so often it's easier to just join the bandwagon. And there are many more. I encourage you to read up on this, Google it, you will find a wealth of information. What I do want to mention here is gut feel. If something doesn't feel right, it may very well not be right. So intuition is actually a very powerful safety measure. And if it doesn't feel right, if you've got that little orange light going off in your head, listen to it, push the pause button and figure out what's bugging you, because there may really be an issue. Okay, the next trait is a respectful work environment. So as leaders, we should aim to create a work environment where different professional opinions are encouraged, are discussed, and are resolved in a timely manner. We don't want to tolerate bullying behavior, so we want a work environment where everybody's treated with dignity, with respect, where trust is fostered, where opinions are valued, and where conflict is resolved fairly and objectively. In my experience, it's never a good idea to try and resolve a conflict via email. It just doesn't work that well. It's much, much better to actually address the conflict, the thing that causes the conflict head on, rather than the person. So address the matter, not the person. Why is this trait important? Well, trust and respect are fundamental to positive interpersonal relationships and a central component of effective working relationships. And a respectful work environment will promote the reporting of adverse incidents and events. I remember one case where a nurse gave the wrong medication and could have stayed quiet about it and decided she came forward with it. And at that hospital, management came down like a ton of bricks on her, disciplinary procedure and everything. And I just sat there thinking, well, this is just stupid because this nurse will never, ever report anything ever again. And this is not what you want. So create an environment where the reporting of adverse events is and near misses is promoted. The seventh trait, continuous learning. So this is not just the 30 CPD points that you need for registration with the Health Professions Council, but this is about finding opportunities to learn about ways to ensure safety and to implement these. You want to enable staff to learn and you want to promote learning in your staff. This can happen through training, self-assessments, and benchmarking that stimulate this environment and that improve performance. And you can then monitor safety through a variety of monitoring techniques, some of which may provide an independent fresh look. So this is important because we want to obtain knowledge, not just theoretically, but also how to apply the knowledge and how to share the knowledge for the benefit of your peers, the facility, the patients or staff. Learning organizations in general are committed to learning from their mistakes, and not just from theirs, but also from other people's mistakes, and they take appropriate actions to then address the lessons learned. So I've put here this quote, "We've always done it this way." I think many of us have heard this when you come into a situation and you get told, yes, but we've always done it this way. And you sit there and think, yes, but we actually could do it better with, having to learn a few slight little skills or tricks or techniques. We can improve on this. So we've always done it this way is not a good attitude to have. Try and be proactive and change it for the benefit of the patient. So the more employees know, the more they can do and the more they can contribute. Turns out continuous learning is actually also surprisingly cost effective, because developing employees is less expensive than hiring new ones. And it makes your employees feel valued, that they actually want to stay. So this is an important thing. For an individual, you learn new skills and knowledge. It helps with your career development. It may be able to go on the CV for the next promotion. It will help you maintain professional registration. You will learn new skills that can benefit work performance, that help you stay current, and some skills maybe just personally enrich you, and that's a good thing too. I remember a story where someone said they played the piano but not very well, and the person who spoke to them said, well, it doesn't matter, it makes you an interesting person. So learning something may personally enrich you. The different learning styles, again, something to be mindful of. Most people are visual learners who would like demonstrations or graphs or flowcharts and learn from that. There are others who like to listen to stuff and learn better that way, the auditory learners, in lectures or seminars or podcasts on the way to work. And then a small percentage, like 3% or so, are kinesthetic learners, when people remember information easier when performing the activity. For example, doing a lab experiment. These are often the ones when you have a lecture or so, they're the ones fidgeting with a pen, for example. Those are likely the ones that are kinesthetic learners. Find out what works for you. Maybe look at yourself and figure out which type of learner you are, and then focus on that, because you'll have the most benefit. I should also mention here, learning includes incident learning. Make use of incident learning systems. There are free ones available. For example, Saffron, I've put the link up. This is the radiotherapy learning system that's housed at the IAEA, with thousands of cases of near misses and incidents that you can filter and search and learn from. If you don't have an incident learning system as part of your quality management system, make use of these. They are really, really fantastic teaching tools and will improve your safety culture, even if it's just by raising awareness around it. The 8th trait, problem identification and resolution. So we want leaders that are responsible for identifying and diagnosing organizational or technical deficiencies. There's the identification component. In radiation safety, we would like a low threshold for identifying issues, and we would like to apply a corrective action program. We can then look at trends. We analyze the information from our program or other assessments to identify trends, which may give us an idea of how things will change in future. We want to resolve these in a timely manner. So we want to identify the issue, its causes and conditions to prevent this from happening again. We then want to evaluate issues thoroughly according to their significance. And this is a good thing where one can use a tool, for example, like a root cause analysis, explained very nicely in AAPM report TG100. Make use of these publications. There's a wealth of information in there. The 9th trait is an environment for raising concerns. So this is an environment that's very much goes hand in hand with a respectful work environment, where personnel feel free to raise safety concerns without fear of retaliation, without fear of intimidation, harassment, or discrimination. You can help to enable this by creating and maintaining and evaluating policies and procedures and processes that allow personnel to freely raise concerns that they might have. Now, you might be in a situation where you have real problems with your boss and you don't feel free to raise issues or concerns with him or her. Therefore, there should be no method of raising potential safety concerns should be discouraged. So ideally, you want to table something directly with your supervisor, but work on other options that are accessible, credible, and effective. We often hear people talk about, I have an open door policy, so you can come in anytime you want. This may be a very effective way of doing this. It may also be a very distracting way if you have work to do and you keep having people coming in. So you'll have to figure out what works for you. Finally, the last trait I'm going to look at are work processes. So we want to plan and control our work activities in such a way that safety is maintained. It's a deliberate process. Thought goes into this. We identify work, we select, plan, schedule, execute the work, close it, and then potentially critique it and learn from what we did wrong. And the entire organization is involved in this and supports the process. Again, often easier said than done if you have processes where more than one group of health professionals is involved. This can become quite a tricky thing to do and to implement. But it's important because we want to ensure that safety is part of the organizational thinking. Radiation medicine, much of it is very high-risk technology, so we have to work together. We do require collaborative decision-making, and we want detailed operating procedures. We want verification at steps where things can go wrong during our implementation. And also, if you have a standard operating procedure, there's a need for procedural compliance among staff. We found that a lot of the incidents in our facility happened when the standard operating procedure is bypassed for something, for whatever reason. Quite often, this is when mistakes start creeping in. Tools that you can use include, for example, the process map. Again, look at TG100. The process map is just a picture of the steps of the process arranged in order. It displays the flow of information or how steps depend on each other. If you want to set up a process map for a certain process, you have to put together a team, preferably users with the same understanding, but often from different backgrounds, which can be quite enriching. Start with a small process, to come up with the map, look for opportunities to improve it. So I've spoken now about general safety culture traits. There are many, many tools that you can use to do this. Root cause analysis, power distance index. I mean, there are lots of things that you can Google to improve, or tools to apply to improve safety culture. I've mentioned 10. There are many, many more. I presented the ones from the IAEA booklet. You will find, if you work through the booklet, I highly encourage it, and you look at the case examples, that there's not a single trait that makes all the difference. Many of the traits go hand in hand. So an improved communication may very well have a very positive effect on positive decision-making. And improving one aspect has positive repercussions on the other ones. Now, of course, not everything's as hunky-dory. Changing culture and behavior is a difficult and long process. It can take a long time. In fact, one of the experts I spoke to about this says it takes 3 generations. So if you're the junior person and you want to implement this, and your senior person is stubborn and old, you're going to struggle to implement safety culture, and you can work within your sphere to improve it. However, once that person leaves the organization and you become the senior person, you can cultivate the safety culture so that it becomes the norm in the next generation. So this is not something that happens overnight. It's something that needs to be worked on consistently. So don't be discouraged by small setbacks. They will happen. Don't be discouraged by difficult people. Find the champions, find the ones that want to improve and work with those. And most people will follow suit because they realize it's a good thing. Apply a small, consistent effort. If you don't do anything, at the end of the year, you will have exactly what you started with. If you apply a small effort, like 1% a day, at the end of the year, that number goes to almost 38. And interestingly, the fast growth only happens towards the end of that year. There's a long period where the growth is very slow and only takes hold much later in the year. So it's a long process. I presented 10 traits that hopefully give you some things to look at and to work with. And yeah, with that, I would like to thank you. I'm going to end with this. This we made on Friday. We're having a linear accelerator that we're decommissioning, and we're making electron trees. It's so cool. I'm loving it. Anyway, thank you very much.
Thank you, Chris. Thanks a lot for this excellent presentation. More than 1,000 colleagues attended today your presentation, and there are also some questions for you. Fortunately, we have 10 minutes to discuss. So a colleague asks, what is the role of medical professionals in safety of society? I think this is a very general question. I'm not sure if the question refers to radiation safety, but would you like to comment, say something about that? The role of medical professionals in safety of society.
So I think, the traits I spoke about today, they're not only about radiation safety. If you improve safety anywhere, you improve quality anywhere. Now, I think from what I can see, this question is mainly about or maybe I have to ask back, is this the society like the Medical Physics Society, or the safety of society, the people we live amongst? I'm not quite sure which society is meant here.
Yeah, also, I think it's very general. What source or book would you recommend for clinical radiation safety and a guide for setting a departmental safety protocol? Do we need a... Yeah, please, go ahead. Chris,
so
go ahead.
I don't have a particular book. I think the IAEA has a lot of fantastic information. I think a good starting point is this Safety Culture Trait Handbook, which might be useful. I found it very enriching when I looked at the traits and then I did research on my own on certain aspects of it. So for example, if you start looking at decision-making and the biases that affect decision-making, I found it extremely fascinating to also become aware of potentially some of my own biases and how to address these. There's a lot of good literature out there on leadership. John Maxwell, for example, I find has some fantastic books on leadership, not necessarily in the medical field, but just leadership in general. And a lot of the things that you learn are applicable to wherever you are, not just to medical fields. But if you ask me for a single book, I'm going to struggle to give you one, to be honest.
Okay. Chris, another colleague says more of a statement, but maybe worth discussing. 2 questions worth asking before pressing the button. First, are my results too good to be true? I have seen it in a trivial case where about 30 workers were diagnosed with identical peripheral vision defects. Turned out that one of the LEDs in the test kit had failed. More seriously, several identical dose measurements were due to the instrument reading full scale. Second, why are we doing this? Again, from radiotherapy. Test results suggested that the new source was weaker than the old one, but nobody asked why they had bought the new one. Fact was the source activity was indeed higher, but the focal distance was wrong. So yeah.
This is a fascinating one because the case studies in the book are, these could be some of the case studies in that book almost. Are my results too good to be true? So I think it's a very, God gave us a brain to use. And if the results are too good to be true and you think something may be off, it is very well possible that it is. In this case, one of the LEDs in the test kit had failed. It's a very straightforward thing where maybe quality control would have picked this up earlier. In the second example, why is the second source weaker than the old one? If common sense tells you this doesn't look right, something is not right, it should be hotter, but I'm not seeing it, it's a good thing to question it. It's a good thing to maybe bring it up with a colleague or an external person. This is one of the reasons why, for example, in South Africa, we have to have an external dose audit before we go clinical on any new LINAC installation. It's a good idea as part of a safety culture to have these regular independent checks on what you're doing. It's not a case of trying to be caught out, but it's a case of trying to improve, to increase the safety net that any potential mishap doesn't actually get to the patient. So I think in both these examples that were mentioned, the source of the error was actually found, it seems, without too many difficulties, which is a very good thing, and maybe an indication of a reasonable safety culture in that hospital.
And another colleague raises a very important issue about inadequate staffing. Can you provide some advice on how to deal with leadership, with administration, to address adequate staffing levels to allow for an appropriate safety culture?
Again, a very tricky question, because usually the head of physics is not the one that holds the money. And it's very difficult to, or I have found at least as medical physicists, we're often not very good at explaining what we do and why we need it, at least in my experience. And so what happens, particularly in resource constraint settings, is that if there's money available, it will very often go to a patient-facing person rather than someone like a physicist who doesn't see patients in the clinic. Now, one thing that looks like it's gaining traction in South Africa is that the regulator wants to start putting staffing labels into the license conditions, so that, we have some basics. For example, if you want to treat the patients, you have to have at least 2 RTTs on the machine. And they are now investigating, is it worthwhile applying minimum staffing levels in radiotherapy or imaging to medical physics as well? There are models around. I think the most common ones are probably the IAEA staffing models. If you haven't heard of them, you can easily Google them, and it'll be the first or the second hit. There are models on staffing in radiotherapy. There are models on staffing in imaging. That will at least tell you how many physicists you should be in your situation. And so in South Africa, I think, so we do have some regulations right now, but I think they're going to come down quite a bit harder on this, just to force the hand of hospital managements. It's a really tricky one to do well. So on the one hand, if your regulator is, plays ball and helps you do this, take advantage of it. At the same time, don't stop educating the funders. Don't stop educating the ones with the money. Don't stop educating the doctors. Explain to them what a physicist brings to the table in your particular field, and help them to motivate for it as well. That may also work.
Right. You said about continuous learning during your presentation. Self-learning is an approach we all know to learning where the individual makes the effort to identify their own learning needs. Do you believe in self-learning? Do you think that this is something that can perhaps bridge some gaps?
Self-learning is, that's what you're asking, self-learning, correct?
Yeah, self-learning.
So self-learning is absolutely, I think it's fantastic. I had, for example, a student who wanted to learn about machine learning and started reading up on it and started to learn how to code and ended up doing his master's in organ at risk contouring and CTV contouring for HDR brachytherapy. He had no idea, he had an interest in it, he got the book and he started learning. So by all means, go for it. If you want to look at something like, how do I take the linear accelerator apart? You know, read the book. Doesn't mean you should go ahead and do it. So with self-learning, the one aspect that is missing is that you don't necessarily know whether you've done it correctly. But that shouldn't be a reason to stop you from doing it. So it's a good idea if you want to learn about a new field and you're a novice in the field, maybe get hold of a mentor in that field who knows what they are doing, who can guide you along some of the common pitfalls so that you don't have to make the same mistakes. But definitely self-learning is very good. It's very useful, and a lot of the information that we need in medical physics is actually freely available out there. And we should make use of this.
Right. The reason I ask you that question is because technology is evolving very rapidly. It's impossible to organize courses on every aspect of medical physics to cover the field. So self-learning, I also think that self-learning is extremely important activity for medical physicists. There are, a colleague asks, there are always some challenging individuals in their workplace. Any top tips based on your own experience, getting other people on board so that they carry the torch and care more? Yeah, it's real life cases.
So this is why I mentioned in my talk, find the champion. So you're not going to go to work with that one difficult person to try and convince them. You will waste a lot of energy trying to convince one person who is actively working against this. We call them blockers. You have the ones who are willing to invest time and energy. Those are the champions. Those are the ones you want to get. And it may take a little while finding them, but if you have conversations on the floor, you will realize pretty quickly who those champions are. Get those on board. You will then have active supporters who say, yeah, this is a good idea, but right now I actually don't have the time or energy to invest in this. And you know, if you have some petition or something that needs to be signed, they will definitely sign it. You have the passive supporters who say, you know, I'm going to go with the flow and see what happens. And you have the blockers. So if you have someone who's particularly difficult, it may be useful that instead of wasting a lot of time trying to convince this person, that you spend that time rather recruiting other people to do it. Because once the safety culture improves and once you see that, you know, your near-miss reporting goes up, that you're picking up mistakes that you weren't before, that people are aware, you know, even the hardest cynics will eventually probably realize this is a good thing.
Thanks, Chris. Time flies. I have one last question.
Okay.
You said about leadership, which is very important. Are leaders born or made? This is especially, I mean, this question for young people, can through hard work, can they become leaders or they are just born? And
so It's a bit of both. If I look at my 3 children, my oldest son is a natural leader. He will walk onto the sports field and he will take charge and he will tell people where to go and what to do. And in many ways that helps being a leader. However, it is acquired as well. There's a large component of leadership that you can learn. And it doesn't mean that a leader has to be the one who's in front of the battle running around, you know, here we go, freedom, kind of like the Scottish guy did in the movie. The leader could very well be the one at the back. If you have an obstacle, who makes sure that the last person in that obstacle course also makes the obstacle course and isn't the one first across the line. So they're very different types of leadership. And it's definitely something that you can learn. And along the way, you'll come across the whole concept of management and leadership. And, you know, you can learn management tools that help you become a better leader. And I mean, very often, let's take this example. You have a group of people going on a mountain hike, and the most timid and quiet one of them, who doesn't really speak to anybody, is the only one who's done a first aid course. And now the one who walks in front trips and breaks their ankle. The leader of this pack will become, with that, will be the one with the knowledge, even if they are the most shy and quiet person in the group. So it doesn't necessarily mean that you're the one because, well, you know, I'm the obvious guy to lead, but it may be because you have the theoretical and practical knowledge to lead in a certain situation. And based on that, you can then develop the leadership abilities to become, you know, slightly more natural in other situations that you might encounter. So the largest part of leadership is something that you can learn, I believe.
Thank you, Chris. We have a long list of questions. Impossible to discuss all these topics. We ran out of time, so I would like to thank you very much for this great webinar, this great presentation, and I also like to thank our colleagues for their active participation. So have a nice day, everyone.
John, maybe one quick thing. If someone wants this presentation, I am perfectly happy to share it. I went back to the first slide where my email address is. Please drop me a mail. I'm happy to email this to you.
Perfect. And we also, the recording of this webinar will be uploaded, as always, all webinars will be uploaded on IOMP's website.
Fantastic. Thank you very much all. It's been a pleasure until we meet in person.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone. Bye.